If there is one question that crosses generations, cultures, and personal histories, it is this: what is the true meaning of life? From time to time, in some moment of reflection or crisis, we are all crossed by this silent doubt. Perhaps after a great achievement that did not bring the expected happiness, or in a difficult moment, when everything seems to lose color. The question arises, why are we here? No matter how much the world advances, how much more connected or comfortable our lives become, the feeling of emptiness and the search for meaning continue to follow us like a shadow that never completely disappears. It is as if, deep within every accomplishment, there is a voice whispering, "What next?" Some people try to ignore this uneasiness, immersing themselves in distractions. Others face it head-on, trying to find answers in science, religion, philosophy, or even extreme experiences. But the fact is that this search is universal and perhaps more relevant than ever. We live in a time of material abundance, but also of great existential confusion. We have never had so many options, so much freedom of choice, and yet the feeling of emptiness is more common than one might think. Many feel like they are just going through the day, following automatic routines, hoping that at some point their true purpose will magically reveal itself. But what if the answer to the meaning of life wasn't something that simply appears? What if it was something that needed to be discovered, built, lived? This is exactly where the story of one of humanity's greatest writers comes in, Leo Tolstoy, a man who apparently had everything anyone could want: fame, fortune, recognition, and yet plunged into the deepest existential crisis. Tolstoy didn't just ask himself the question we all ask. He refused to accept superficial answers. His quest was intense, painful, and ultimately transformative. And it's that journey we'll explore in this video, not just to understand Tolstoy, but to find clues that might illuminate our own path. Before we continue, check if you are already subscribed to the channel. This is very important for us to continue bringing you deep reflections like this. If you are not yet subscribed, take advantage now, and let's continue this search together. Because perhaps by understanding how Tolstoy faced this question, we can also find new answers for ourselves. The man who had everything. Who was Leo Tolstoy? If the meaning of life seemed to elude so many, Leo Tolstoy's story adds even more layers to this search. After all, how could a man who possessed everything the world values feel so empty? Who was Leo Tolstoy after all? Born in 1828 into an aristocratic Russian family, Tolstoy grew up surrounded by privilege. From a young age, he demonstrated a brilliant mind and a keen sensitivity to observe human behavior. His early years were marked by a strict formal education, travel, material wealth, and an intense social life. His rise as a writer was meteoric. Works such as War and Peace and Anna Karenina not only established him as one of the greatest novelists in history, but also brought him international fame while he was still alive, a rarity for the time. Tolstoy was seen as a literary genius, a mind ahead of his time. His books were celebrated, his opinions were respected, and his social standing placed him among the most influential men in Russia. But the real story of Tolstoy is not just about his external successes. Behind the curtains of wealth and public admiration, there was a man in conflict, someone who, despite all his achievements, felt a growing restlessness within himself. The society of the time, and perhaps ours too, sold the idea that happiness lay in the accumulation of things, of prestige, of property, of recognition. Tolstoy followed this path for years, believing that by achieving these goals, he would find complete satisfaction. But instead, the more success he achieved, the greater the feeling of absurdity and disorientation became. It is important to understand this in order to delve into his inner journey. Tolstoy was not someone who sought meaning in life from lack. He sought it from excess. He had already experienced everything that most of us dream of achieving, and yet he felt lost. This realization makes his search even more relevant to us, because if a man who had it all still felt empty, perhaps the answer to the meaning of life lies in another direction, not in what we accumulate or achieve, but in something deeper, more silent, more essential. The restlessness that began to germinate within him was not weak. It grew with each passing year, until it became impossible to ignore. Tolstoy realized that he had to find answers, or else he would live and die with this suffocating anguish. It is from this point that Tolstoy's true journey begins. The journey not of a man in search of more achievements, but of someone desperately searching for meaning. And it is in this deep dive that he would face the darkest shadow of human existence, the shadow of the void, Tolstoy's existential crisis. With everything the world had to offer at his fingertips, Leo Tolstoy should have been a completely satisfied man. But in reality, he was on the brink of an internal abyss. What began as a quiet discomfort would soon turn into a deep and overwhelming existential crisis. Tolstoy described this phase as a time when he felt that life had lost all meaning. He woke up every morning wondering why he should go on living. None of the pleasures that had once given him satisfaction, literature, social recognition, possessions, seemed to have any value in the face of the immensity of death. The question that hammered in his mind was brutally simple, and at the same time impossible to ignore. If death is inevitable, what is the point of any human effort? For Tolstoy, this was not a distant, cold, philosophical reflection. It was a living anguish that consumed him in his daily life. He reported feeling like a man lost in a forest, running desperately in all directions without finding a way out. Each step forward seemed only to take him deeper into despair. He even admitted in autobiographical writings that thoughts of suicide became a constant in his mind, not for lack of courage or some passing crisis, but because for him there was no sufficient logical justification for continuing to exist. During this period, Tolstoy experienced what many today would call an existential void, a sense of disconnection so intense that even the most beautiful experiences in life, like the love of his family or the success of his books, seemed irrelevant. Everything was temporary, everything was finite, and in the face of the certainty of the end, what could really matter? The interesting thing is that this crisis did not arise from a personal failing or a specific traumatic event. It was born of his own lucidity, of a clear perception of the transience of life. The more Tolstoy thought, the more impossible it seemed to justify any human act in the face of inevitable death. He tried to find answers in traditional ways, science, philosophy, culture, but everything seemed to offer him only descriptions of the how of life without ever touching on the why. Science explained the mechanisms of existence, but it gave no meaning to it. Philosophy, however brilliant, often got lost in abstractions far removed from the emotional reality he lived. The chasm grew wider, and Tolstoy, at the height of his fame and fortune, felt more lost than ever. It is at this point that his story touches us so deeply, because deep down, who has never faced, even for a brief moment, that feeling of emptiness? Who has never wondered if there really is a purpose, or if we are all just trying to fill time until the inevitable end? Tolstoy's crisis was not just his. It is, in a way, a mirror of our own humanity. But, as we will see later, it was precisely when he reached the bottom of this abyss that Tolstoy found the possibility of a new light, an answer that did not come from logical reasoning, but from a much deeper transformation. Before we move on to this crucial turning point, if this content is making sense to you and bringing you important reflections, don't forget to like the video. This helps us a lot to continue bringing you deep topics like this. Now let's look at how Tolstoy initially tried to find answers, and why those early attempts also failed. Failed attempts: science, rationality, and pleasures. When he reached the bottom of the existential abyss, Tolstoy did not immediately give in to despair. On the contrary, his restless mind and his intellectual background led him to seek answers. If life seemed meaningless, he would dedicate himself to finding a justification, rational, logical, satisfactory, to continue living. The first source Tolstoy looked to was science. During the 19th century, scientific progress was seen almost as a new religion. It was the promise that with enough knowledge, all human questions would be answered. Tolstoy then immersed himself in scientific studies, hoping to find some glimmer of hope. But science, despite explaining the workings of nature with astonishing precision, offered no answer to the question of the meaning of life. It could tell us how we live, how the human body works, how stars form, the laws of physics, but it remained completely silent when asked. Why? Science was powerful in its objectivity, but cold in its inability to address the yearnings of the soul. Disappointed, Tolstoy then turned to philosophy. He read ancient and modern thinkers, studied theories on morality, ethics, and existentialism. He sought in the words of the wise some clue that would give coherence to the act of existing. But philosophy, with all its depth, seemed to fall into a labyrinth of interpretations and concepts without offering a solid truth to which he could cling. Each philosophical system seemed an elaborate but equally vulnerable human construction. Some denied the existence of any meaning. Others tried to construct it artificially. In the end, to Tolstoy, it all sounded like words thrown against the vastness of the unknown, incapable of bringing true solace. Finding no answers in either science or philosophy, Tolstoy tried to turn to something simpler, the pleasures of life. Why not enjoy what was good until the end? Many people around him seemed to be following this path, seeking comfort in immediate pleasure, in luxury, in social relations, in art. Tolstoy tried to immerse himself in parties, in travel, in wine, in music. He tried to distract his mind from the nagging question that tormented it, but none of it worked. Every moment of pleasure was accompanied by the reminder of his own finitude. No joy was deep enough to fill the emptiness he felt. Everything seemed temporary, ephemeral, superficial. Once again, the same feeling. If everything ends in death, what is the real value of these fleeting moments? This realization brought a new layer of despair. Not only did theoretical knowledge fail to offer meaning, but practical life experience also proved insufficient. Tolstoy understood with painful clarity that the answers he sought would not be found through the traditional paths of reason or amusement. Something deeper, something beyond human logic, would need to be accessed if he were to find the inner peace he so desperately desired. This is where his journey takes an unexpected turn. Realizing that science, philosophy, and pleasure offered no satisfactory answers, Tolstoy began to look somewhere he had never looked with real attention: the lives of simple people, of peasants, of workers, of those who, even without great knowledge, seemed to live with a clear purpose and an enviable serenity. This change of focus would be the beginning of a radical transformation, a rediscovery that would forever change not only his life, but also the way millions of people to this day view the search for the meaning of existence. The turning point, the observation of the simple. When all scholarly answers failed, Tolstoy did something that most thinkers of his time would never have considered. He turned his gaze to the simple, to those who, even without vast scientific or philosophical knowledge, seemed to live with a serenity and a firmness of purpose that he, with all his intelligence, could not find. He observed the Russian peasants, humble workers who, despite the extreme hardships of life, demonstrated a quiet faith, a serene acceptance of existence. They were not people who discussed complex theories or sought elaborate explanations. They lived, loved, suffered, and celebrated life with an impressive naturalness. This realization came as a shock to Tolstoy. How could those who had the least and who faced the hardest life live without the crushing weight of doubt that tormented him? How could they get up every day and move forward with dignity, even when faced with the certainty of death? The answer seemed to lie in something he had long neglected: faith. Not an intellectualized faith, debated in theological treatises or limited to empty rituals, but a living, organic faith, born from the heart and manifested itself in everyday attitudes. A silent confidence that life had a greater meaning, even if that meaning could not be fully understood. Tolstoy saw that for these people, the meaning of life was not something that was endlessly sought after as a goal to be achieved. It was something that was lived. Every small act, working, caring for one's family, helping others, was part of something bigger. Existence did not need to be justified intellectually. It was accepted with humility and gratitude. This realization began to erode the worldview that Tolstoy had built up until then. He, who had always believed that the answers would come from reason, began to suspect that perhaps reason alone was insufficient to capture the depth of life. The faith of the simple did not deny pain or death, but it offered an answer that, for Tolstoy, became increasingly convincing. Life has meaning because it is part of something greater, something that transcends our limited understanding. And it is precisely by living in accordance with this greater something, with humility and love, that we find peace. This discovery was not instantaneous. It was born of years of silent observation, of internal questioning, and of a painful abandonment of intellectual pride. But little by little, Tolstoy began to realize that perhaps the secret to filling the existential void lay, paradoxically, in renouncing the need to understand everything, living with faith, loving selflessly, serving others, finding beauty in the little things. These attitudes, so common among the peasants he observed, began to reveal themselves as the true philosophy of life. This was the turning point in his journey, the moment when, instead of seeking grand, unattainable answers, Tolstoy opened himself to the profound simplicity of existence. And it is from this new vision that he would completely rebuild his way of living, finding a peace that previously seemed impossible. By the way, speaking of deep reflections, I would really like to know which part of Tolstoy's story has touched you the most so far. Leave your comment below. I read them all, and it would be amazing to hear your opinion about this journey. Now let's move on to discover how Tolstoy applied this new discovery to his life and how it changed everything. The new philosophy of life: faith, love, and service. Having understood that the meaning of life might not lie in great philosophical systems or material achievements, Tolstoy began a silent but radical transformation. It was time to rebuild his existence, brick by brick, based on what he had learned from observing the lives of the simple: faith, love, and service. This change did not remain just an idea. Tolstoy put his new philosophy into practice in a forceful way. He began by giving up many of the privileges he had accumulated throughout his life. He simplified his lifestyle, drastically reduced his expenses, and sought to live more closely with the peasants he admired so much. Money, which had once represented status and power, came to be seen as an obstacle to true spiritual freedom. Tolstoy believed that attachment to wealth corrupted the soul and distanced us from what was essential. In response, he began giving away large portions of his fortune, trying to redress the imbalance between his way of life and the ideals he now championed. More than that, he dedicated himself to manual labor. He cultivated the land and did simple tasks with his own hands, experiencing in practice the dignity of those who participate directly in the natural cycle of life. For him, work ceased to be just a necessity or obligation. It became a path to integration with the world and with himself. At the heart of this new philosophy was faith, but as we have seen, it was not a blind or dogmatic faith. It was the quiet confidence that life has an intrinsic purpose, even if we cannot fully understand it. Tolstoy came to live with the awareness that his existence was part of something greater, something that transcended human logic, but that revealed itself in the simplest and most sincere actions. This faith translated into practical love for one's neighbor. Tolstoy rejected the idea of love as an abstract feeling and began to see it as a concrete action, helping those in need, being fair, treating everyone with compassion. For him, love was the axis that united all things, the force that gave meaning to suffering, to joy, and even to death itself. And finally, there was service. Tolstoy came to see his mission no longer as a personal quest for glory or happiness, but as a commitment to the good of others. Writing, teaching, mentoring, all. These activities now took on a new dimension: service to humanity, not to himself. This transformation was profound and, as might be expected, met with resistance. His family, friends, and society at large often did not understand his changes. Tolstoy faced criticism, isolation, and even internal conflict, but he remained steadfast, guided by the new light he had found. His life, once marked by external achievements, became defined by an internal movement of growth, humility, and giving. And it is this shift that makes Tolstoy's story so powerful. He didn't just find answers to his existential crisis, he shaped an entire life around those answers. Today, his example invites us to reflect. Perhaps the true meaning of life lies less in great discoveries and more in small daily attitudes, driven by faith, love, and service to others. In the next chapter, we will see how these principles of Tolstoy can be applied to our own reality, helping us face our modern crises with more wisdom and hope. How Tolstoy teaches us to face our crises today. Tolstoy's journey spans centuries and comes to us as a powerful echo. His plunge into despair, his tireless search, and his inner reconstruction offer valuable lessons for facing the existential crises of the modern world, crises that, although different in form, are as profound as those he experienced. We live in an age of abundance and connectivity. We have never had so much access to information, so much entertainment, so many life options. And paradoxically, we have never been so plagued by feelings of emptiness, anxiety, and confusion about the purpose of existence. The feeling of being lost amidst so many possibilities is common, especially among young adults who grow up pressured to be someone and find their passion as if it were an obligation. It is precisely in this scenario that Tolstoy's example becomes so relevant. The first lesson is simple and revolutionary. The meaning of life does not have to be found in great achievements or perfect intellectual answers. Sometimes it comes from the way we choose to live today. Tolstoy shows us that even without understanding all the mysteries of the universe, we can live with purpose, faith, and compassion. This is a powerful message for those who feel they need to discover their meaning before they can begin to live fully. Tolstoy teaches us that meaning is built on the journey, in small gestures of love, in honest work, in the sincere search to be better each day. Another crucial lesson is the importance of simplicity. Instead of complicating life by seeking satisfaction in millions of options and stimuli, we can find peace in what is essential. True human connections, actions that make sense to us, moments of authentic presence. Tolstoy also warns us about the dangers of comparison and the relentless pursuit of external validation. He, who gained worldwide acclaim, discovered that the applause of the crowds does not bring inner fulfillment. If we continue to pursue the approval of others as our only source of value, we will inevitably fall into a cycle of dissatisfaction. In contrast, focusing on building a life aligned with our deepest values, regardless of external recognition, is a much more solid path to personal fulfillment. Finally, Tolstoy reminds us that existential crises are not failures, but invitations. Invitations to rethink, to grow, to find new meanings. When we feel lost, it is life calling us to transformation. Tolstoy only found true peace after going through the darkness, and perhaps it is the same for us. So if today you face doubts, anguish, or uncertainty, know that this is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of something greater. Just like Tolstoy, you can use these moments not to give in to despair, but to build a more authentic, simpler life, and above all, one that is more connected to what really matters. If this reflection has made sense to you so far, don't forget to like the video. This way you help us to bring these messages to more people who may also be in need of inspiration at this time. The final answer, meaning is in the simplicity of living. After his entire journey, from literary glory to existential crisis, from rational search to reunion with simple faith, Tolstoy reached a conclusion that, paradoxically, was much more accessible than he could have imagined at the beginning of his search. The meaning of life lies in the simplicity of living. It is not necessary to understand all the mysteries of the universe to live well. It is not necessary to achieve great things, nor to accumulate wealth or recognition. What really matters is how we choose to live each day, with love, with honesty, with service to others. Tolstoy understood that the true meaning of life lies in the now, in the small actions that reflect a greater good. It lies in the ability to act with kindness, even in the face of uncertainty, to find beauty even in the simplest routines, to build meaning through our sincere surrender to the present moment. This answer does not eliminate the mystery of existence. On the contrary, it embraces it. It acknowledges that we do not have all the answers and that we can still live with courage, gratitude, and faith. Tolstoy shows us that the weight of existence becomes lighter when we stop trying to control it completely and start simply living it, with purpose, but also with humility before the vastness of life. This is the great legacy he left us, the certainty that even in an uncertain world, life can be immensely meaningful when we choose to love, serve, and trust. And if today you carry some doubt, some restlessness, remember, perhaps what you seek is not in new achievements, but in the way you are living now. Sometimes the meaning of life does not need to be found, it needs to be lived. If this message touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel here. That way you can continue receiving reflections like this and follow us on this journey of self-knowledge and transformation. Thank you very much for following along this far. And remember, The simplicity of life is often its greatest mystery, and also its greatest gift.